You kicked the bucket. We're glad to see you all here. My name is Barb Leese, and here are a few things you need to know before we start. Please silence your cell phones. Turn on your tea coil if you have one. If there's time for questions, Judy and I will come around with the microphones. Please speak directly into the mic. And if you're able, afterwards, if you could help put up the chairs, there's dollies in the front and the back. And now for the main event. Most of you recognize today's speaker as a longtime presence and talented professional here at Drake Community Library, where she has worked since attending Grinnell College in the mid-1980s. She oversees all computer, audiovisual, website, and online resources, including digital archive projects. Fortunately for us, one of the favorite parts of her job is preserving and sharing local history. Her most recent project is the publication of the book, No One is Better Than You, Edith Renfrow Smith and the Power of a Mother's Words. Today, Monique will share the process of writing, illustrating, and publishing this book. Please join me in welcoming Monique Shore.
Good morning. I think I'm on, so I think we're good to go. So I'm super excited to be sharing with you all this morning some of those little bits that happened in the background in the evolution of this project. I know many of you have been here for several of the talks that have been given about Edith Renfrow Smith and what we've learned about her life. But I will just do kind of a brief overview for some of the key points. But first, just a little bit about me. So I did come to Grinnell in 1986. I was born in Las Vegas, moved to Boulder City, Nevada when I was 8, and that's where my mom still lives. Both my parents had come from Wisconsin. I'd done a lot of vacations there, and I wanted 4 seasons. So, those of you who are snowbirds and you want to get out of here in February, I understand it, but I really enjoy the 4 seasons. So I arrived as a college student and immediately fell in love with the town and the community. And I was very fortunate that the lovely Lorna Calkins hired me in March of 1991. My first job was typing the cards for the card catalog. There was one computer in the library and nobody else wanted to touch it. So I became the technology person, and it has evolved since there. So, and the digital archiving stuff that has been a part of it has become my favorite part of my job. So, The summary of who we're talking about today, right? Edith Renfrow Smith, born in this community in 1914, 2 weeks before the outbreak of World War I, to one of the few black families in town. She did have her grandparents and her aunts and uncles lived here. She had 5 brothers and sisters. 4 of them were older, quite a bit older, so they were out of the house most of the time that she remembers, and then 1 younger brother. She did have cousins in the area. Most of them were older than her. This particular picture is with, she's in the back, that's her and her younger brother, and then those are cousins that lived in Newton. So there were extended family in the Newton area. At that time, they could hop on the train and go visit. So they would hop on the train and go back and forth to Newton, go back and forth to Montezuma and Ewart. So they got to see those folks quite a bit that way. Her grandparents had all been born into slavery. This is mentioned in the book that I wrote. So her grandfather, George Craig, seen there seated at the front, when they moved to town in 1890, he gave an interview to the local paper in which he said that he passed through Grinnell as a freedom seeker on the Underground Railroad, and he said that he traveled with John Brown on that trip. So that is a tie. This woman tied directly back to the earliest days of our town's history. Her grandmother was also born into slavery. She was the daughter of an enslaved woman named Jane and a French plantation owner. They had 3 children together, and when he knew he was dying, he sent the children away to be raised by Quakers so that they could be raised free, and Jane wouldn't leave his side. He wrote in his will that she should be freed after his death, but that will was not honored, and so the children never saw her again. So all of the Renfrow children, it was really important. Education was a pillar of their family, right? So all of the children, the 6 children, black family, middle of the Depression, they all attended college. They all went to college and graduated and had successful careers. She was the only one that went to Grinnell College. And part of the reason she wanted so badly to go to Grinnell is part of her story that you'll hear later. So in 1937, she became the first black woman to graduate from Grinnell College. So after that, she couldn't get a job in Grinnell. It was 1937. It was the Depression. Jobs were scarce anyways, but nobody in town would hire her. So she moved to Chicago. She worked at the Y. She worked at the University of Chicago. She met and married Henry Smith, became a mom, became a teacher, became a lifelong volunteer. But throughout her life, she always had considered Grinnell home. So her mother lived in the family home until her death in 1962, and then the ownership of that home passed on to Edith. She owned the house until 2004. So she rented it and was a fabulous landlord. There are people in town who remember her as landlord, remember them coming back regularly. And so she still has connections. There's a young woman named April Isaac Van Nersveld, I think I have those names right, whose family lived here when she was born. And she and Edith talk on the phone regularly. So she's very connected to the people who have been in her life. When she would return, after the family home was no longer where she could stay, she would stay with her good friends, Booker and Alma Kiner, who lived in Ewart. They farmed a farm that had been in Alma's family since the 1860s. Her mother's first husband was the son of George Lucas, who was the first black man to own property in Poweshiek County. The son, her first husband died after their first child was born. So I don't know what you call that, if it's a step-great-grandfather or what it is, but that's the connection. It was the family, it was still in Alma's family. And 60 acres of that land is still owned by his direct descendant. So one of our heritage farms and the first black landowner in the county. She also is directly tied to. Okay, so as was mentioned, one of the things that I do is digital archiving. So back in 2013, we here at the library started a project called Poweshiek History Preservation, the Poweshiek History Preservation Project, PHPP. So what our vision was, in 2013, we were involved in a grant program through the State Library of Iowa. The state library wanted to encourage collaborations between different types of libraries. We knew that digitizing material was a way that we could preserve them and save them, items. We also knew that the files were really big and that saving them, the hard drive space that was needed, and putting them online in 2013, 10 years ago, was a really big deal. Talking about gigabytes of space at that time was overwhelming. So we knew that we wanted to do it, but we didn't have a way to store it, and we certainly didn't have a way to make it accessible online. However, the college was just implementing a new product called Digital Grinnell, which was intended to be an online digital archive. So through this state library program, we created a project with them where they would do the hosting and the management of the digital files, and we would work with the community to encourage items to be contributed. So by comparison, when you contribute something to our physical archives, you sign over ownership. If you bring in your photos and you want them added to our archives, you sign a deed of gift that says they now belong to the library. Understandably, a lot of people don't want to do that with their family photos. So what we did with PHPP is we said, bring them in, we'll scan them, we'll capture all of that important information. Who who's in the picture, when it was taken, what's right, all that stuff that we now call metadata, the stuff that's inside the file. We'll capture that stuff. We'll save the digital file. You'll allow us to put it on this online through what's called a Creative Commons license, which means that people can look at it and use it for research, but they can't publish it or do anything with it without going back to you for permission. So this is our protocol, right? So we had established this in 2013, and we're starting to spread the word about it. About that same time, Dan Kaiser, who is a retired professor who does a lot of research on local history topics, started to research early African American families of Grinnell. Dan regularly uses the archives and is in a lot. And he came to me and he said, Monique, the Renfrow family is really important in this town's history, and we don't have any pictures of them. Excuse me. Do you think that we could connect with Edith Renfrow Smith and see if she had any family photos she might be willing to contribute through PHPP? And I thought, I don't know, we can try, right? So, so I got in touch with the alumni office, and at that point she was 101, one of the oldest living Grinnell alumni, and the college knew who she was, of course. And when alumni people went to Chicago, they would often visit her. So there was a gentleman named Vince. He's no longer at the college, and I don't remember his last name, but Vince was delightful. Vince came over. I told him what our process was like. I gave him the laptop and the scanner and sent him off, and he was going to go visit Edith and see what he could scan. So Vince returned after a weekend where he had done that, and he came into me and he said, she's amazing. She's got such an incredible memory. I scanned about a dozen photos, but she's just got so many stories to tell, and she's planning to visit Grinnell in a couple months. She was 101, but she had what I believe is a great niece who is an artist who was one of remember the Grin City Artist Residency Program? So this great niece was an artist in residency in Grinnell. So she had decided, along with her daughter, Alice, that they would come and visit because she loved Grinnell and she always enjoyed visiting. So we gave her a call and said, well, if you're coming anyways, would you be willing to bring a few more pictures? And maybe we could do a little live oral history thing with Dan? And she's like, sure, no problem. So the first time I met her, she walked in the doors of the library here, she and her daughter. And you know, what you have in mind when you're thinking about meeting somebody who's 101 is a certain thing, right? None of that was true. So she came in just shuffling right along. She wanted a tour of the library. She had her little box of pictures. We sat in the back room and we scanned pictures all afternoon. She was talking a mile a minute. Alice was talking a mile a minute. Thankfully, we turned on a recorder because they were sharing amazing stories as we were scanning these photos. So that day we scanned probably 3 or 4 dozen photos. Pretty much everything that you've seen of her is something that has been scanned by the library through this project. So that afternoon we scanned all the photos, and then the next day she arrived in this spiffy pink suit in this very room, and we packed it to overflowing, and she and Dan Kaiser had a delightful interview, and the recording of which you can see on our website. So that was awesome. It was amazing. She was 101. I didn't have any idea, I already did that part. I didn't have any idea if I would see her again because she was 101. So it was a highlight. Who could ask for more? Well, then she turned 102, and she turned 103, and she turned 104, and Dan would come in, and we'd say, gosh, she's still around. I wish there was more that was happening. And then in 2019, the college decided to give her an honorary degree. And I was thrilled when Rachel Bly gave me a call and said, hey, the college has decided to give her an honorary degree. Do you want to be in on the phone call when we call and tell her? So that was fun. I went over to Rachel's office, and I was able to be in on that call, and that was just a delight. And then when she came to town, I had dinner with her. The day of the graduation was one of those just frigid graduation days. She was so cold. There's just not much to her anyways. And so she had layers and layers on under her black robe, and she just tossed that fancy hat and put on her stocking cap to keep her warm. But a wonderful celebration. And she was 104. So seemed like maybe that'd be it, right? Well, then she turned 105. And that next fall, Tamara Babouf, who has spoken to this group several times, arrived at Grinnell and started hearing about this amazing woman who'd received this honorary degree. Her area of academic focus is on African American women in academia. So her ears had just perked up about this person who was the first black woman to graduate from Grinnell, and she wanted to know more about this story. So you can imagine your first semester in town, you're a little overwhelmed with things. So she'd done a couple of asking of folks, but hadn't really gotten much information. And then as the second semester settled in and she wanted to do more, guess what happened? Hello, everything shut down. The world shut down, right? So big halt on all of that. One of the first students who was allowed back on campus was an international student from Ethiopia. Not only was she an international student, Ethiopia was in the middle of a civil war. So Faven was allowed to come back to campus, and her advisor was Dr. B, was Tamara Babouf. So when summer rolled around, Faven wasn't able to go home and went to Dr. B and said, hey, is there any research that maybe I could help with? And Tamara said, well, I'd love to learn more about Edith Renfrow Smith. Let's see what we can find. And so they had checked at the college archives and hadn't really found that much. And one day, Faven walks in to the library here. We're still all masked, right? You remember those days? There weren't very many people around yet. We were all masked. Faven walks in. She stands at the front desk. And she asks one of my coworkers, I'm wondering if you have anything in your archives about this woman. And my coworker recognized this was a name that I was very interested in, and had me come out. And I kid you not, I may not have had this exact physical reaction, but in my soul, this is how I felt when Faven said, do you have anything on Edith Renfrow Smith? Oh! Because we had just been waiting. We had been preparing all this stuff. We had all these beautiful photos. I had gotten homemade fudge and handwritten notes, and she was just this incredible person, and somebody needed to tell her story more than I was able to. And so Faven arrived, and I took her in the back, and I'm like, oh, have I got stuff for you? And I pulled out my boxes, and I pulled out my stuff, and her eyes got big. And she said, I have to go back and tell Dr. B about this. And so the next day, she arrived with Tamara, and Tamara was a little puzzled when she said, how would you describe Mrs. Renfrow Smith? And I just said, you just can't. Like it's unbelievable how her presence just defies your expectation of someone her age. I said, you've got to meet her. And they said, could we? I said, sure, I've got her phone number. So I gave her a call, and the next thing you know, they were headed to Chicago, and they had their first meeting with her, and came back just as excited as I knew they would. And Faven, and one of the things that we had talked about when they were doing their research was the fact that there's an art gallery, a student art gallery on campus named in her honor. They walk by it every time they go to the dining hall. Smith Gallery. Nobody really knew that the Smith Gallery was named after this Smith. So Faven said, that just has to be corrected. I'm going to do something about that. And she is one of those students, if she puts her mind to it, you know it's going to get done. So she came back and she decided she was going to put together a rededication for that gallery to happen that fall. Remember, we're still on the edge of COVID, and this is like July, and she's talking about doing it in October. I'm going to do an exhibit of all the pictures of her life, and I'm going to have them come, and big dreams. I'm going to make a video that every student will see. Big dreams, but she got it done. And so that October, sure enough, Edith Renfrow Smith returned to Grinnell for a fabulous celebration and rededication of the Smith Gallery. She was able to meet with students, something she'd never done before. She was able to meet with a group of college students, with a group of high school students. She was able to meet with all of the black female faculty who have been so inspired by her. It was a fabulous, fabulous event. And she was 107. So would there be no more? The next year, she turned 108. So we went to Chicago, off to celebrate her birthday with her. And I put together a photo book full of pictures of Grinnell in the 1920s and 30s. Pictures of what Grinnell looked like when she was growing up. And she sat and looked through that and shared her memories and the thought, what came back to her walking through Central Park and going to school, and captured some more of her amazing memories. And it was great. And on the car drive home, we were all abuzz, and we're just thinking, there still needs to be more. She's so amazing. There needs to be more. Well, side note, Tamra happens to have been friends with President Ann Harris for the last 20 years or so, because they both taught at the same university before coming to Grinnell. So all of the things that we were finding about Edith Renfrow Smith, we put together to take. I got to go to the president's office. I've never had that honor before. But we went and we chatted with President Harris and about these deep ties in the community, these incredible stories that we were finding. And immediately President Harris said, that new building needs to be named for this woman. She bridges that gap between the community and the college. This needs to happen. And so she then had to, do all the things to get the board to approve it, like those little things, right? So, so she put together her plan, and her team went to work. They got board approval, and then that October, over October break, she went to Chicago to tell Mrs. Renfrow Smith, actually to ask if it was all right if they did this. And I happened to be taking our daughter to Chicago for fall break that year, and I said, can I come? Can I come? I'll take pictures, because there wasn't going to be a college photographer there. So I was able to be there at that meeting. They Zoomed in. So Tamara and Faven and Dan were able to connect and be present virtually as that significant conversation was made. And it was quite delightful. It had happened, sadly, that just before break, in the week before, is when they had all those racial incidents on campus. So this had been something that had been in the works for months, and the hope had been to announce it right away. But with all of that turmoil, that announcement was delayed. And so we couldn't tell anybody. But then in December, they did make the public announcement that Renfrow Hall, and who knew that at 108 you'd be Zooming so much, right? So they connected virtually to be present for that announcement, and it was another wonderful day in this journey. Now, throughout all of our conversations with her, many times it had been said, "You have an amazing story. Has anybody written your story? Is anybody documenting this?" And there was, well, you know, so-and-so was working on something, and this person was talking about it, but nothing was happening. When this happened, I could no longer deny the nudge that was being knocked in my side that I needed to see if I could make this happen. I couldn't write a big scholarly nonfiction book about her life, but I thought I could maybe pull off a children's book. And so that's when I started this process in earnest. Looking at the clock. Okay, we can go a few more minutes. 10:40 is the break time-ish? Okay. So it was really this is when I started thinking about this. Now, I didn't know what I was doing. I've not done anything this significant before in terms of a children's book, but the alumni group at the college has a very active Facebook page. So in January, I threw out to the alumni group, "Hey, I've got this idea, and I'm looking for somebody that might know what they're talking about, who might be interested." And so I threw this out to the alumni group. I had lots of input and lots of encouragement. And then I had somebody chime in that their housemate, not a Grinnellian, but a housemate, was a black female artist and writer who had recently started a children's book publishing partnership. Right? So thank you, Alumni Network, and thank you, Edith Magic, all along the way. And we call it Edith Magic because things just have happened when they needed to. So that is how I found the illustrator. Erica lives in Seattle and has done all sorts of different kinds of work. She had just recently started a children's publishing company with another friend, but then that had kind of fallen aside because the other friend got very sick. And so she was an illustrator, and I kind of had an idea, and we decided we were going to see if we could figure it out together. So I had drafted the text. She threw together some sample images, just kind of concept drawings to show me the kind of work that she could do. And then on March 25th last year, so just over a year ago, the first step was to get approval from the woman herself. So I went to Chicago and I took the draft copy of the text and had put in a couple of those sample illustrations from Erica. And I read it to Mrs. Renfrow Smith for the first time. She had a copy that she followed along just that closely the whole time. You can envision I'm reading to her, I'm looking up over the text, and I'm watching her just scouring each page. And my heart was pounding. And I finished on that last page. I choked up a little bit at the power of that moment. And she said, "You see, you were the one who was meant to do it." Because, let's be honest, I am a white girl that has no idea what she went through. I don't feel like I have the qualifications to tell her story. And I want to be very, very sensitive to that. So having her blessing was a critical thing. And it has not been easy, right? Because there are many complications here. It's been a great growth opportunity, lots to learn, but she has been incredible. But she and her daughter, Alice, who's the other woman here, have been a part of this from the very beginning. Now, that same day, I was able to do another Zoom call between her and Erica. So Erica was able to meet with her and chat with her for the very first time. that night, this is the first drawing that Erica did after talking with her directly. And you will see that it's very, very close to the image that's on the cover of the book, because that inspiration and what she was how she was able to capture her, the lips were too thick. That was the correction that needed to be made. So, but that we incorporated that from that first meeting. So the next thing was to figure out how to pay for it, because you know, it takes money to do stuff like this. So I did what's called a Kickstarter campaign. So Kickstarter is one of those online tools that allows you to raise funds. And you have to put together a Kickstarter campaign. You set a certain goal for the amount that you want to raise. You have a certain launch date, and then they encourage you to do a video that introduces your project. So I also became a little more skilled at video editing. So before we go to break, I think I'll share the video that was the launch for that Kickstarter, and then we'll pick up after break with what happened after that. Okay? So when we come back, we'll start with that video and the rest of the story, okay? All right, go grab a cookie.
Okay. 10-minute break. Returning promptly, and once again, Monique Shore.
All right, I think we've got our technical issues worked out. So this was the video that I put together to launch the Kickstarter campaign. So the idea was that it was to introduce her and her story to people who didn't know about it, who might be interested in helping to support the campaign. So it's about 3 minutes long, and there's a sweet treat at the very end. So I'm Monique Shore, and this is my friend Edith Renfrow Smith. Edith, tell me what you think about the story I wrote.
Oh, the kids will love it because it's so interesting.
It's your life. Your life is interesting.
It is.
Edith Renfrow Smith was tenacious and resolute. From the time she was little until she was old and gray, she faced each day with determination, ready to greet each person with a smile and each challenge with the strength passed on from her family. She grew up in that house. She went to Davis when it was a brand new school. She was born the same year that the Merchants National Bank opened. Little Edith loved to hear her mama tell stories about their family and all they had overcome. She learned how her grandparents had been born slaves and had escaped and come to Iowa. She learned how they had been denied the chance to go to school and do other things because they were black. She learned about all the things that had been taken from her family in the past. Knowing what they had lived through and what they had accomplished made Edith proud and determined and confident that she could do hard things too. In 1933, she enrolled at Grinnell College. She lived at home to save money, and she worked 2 jobs while she was a student to pay her tuition. She was the only black student on the entire campus for the entire 4 years that she was here. In 1937, she made history when she became the first black woman to graduate from Grinnell. In 2019, when she was 105 years old, she went on that stage right there, and she received an honorary degree from her alma mater. When she went to the podium that day, she said, "Grinnell has been my life." And the college recently announced that their newest building is going to be named in her honor. Renfrow Hall will be in the block between campus and downtown. I've written a children's book about her life entitled No One is Better Than You, Edith Renfrow Smith and the Power of a Mother's Words. Your support of this Kickstarter campaign will pay the commission for the illustrator and will help me provide free copies of the book to libraries throughout Iowa and Chicago, the 2 places where Edith has spent her life.
Oh, lovely, just so beautiful. Oh, good. See, you were the one that knew how to do it.
So that little clip was her response after she heard my reading it the first time. So it was a pretty special moment. So the Kickstarter launched. Oops,
I'm Monique Shore.
sorry.
What do you think
You don't need
about
to watch
this?
it again. Let's see, how do I advance?
Story I wrote.
One moment, please. Go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So the Kickstarter launched on April 10th, and my goal was to raise $10,000. So I had figured out that would be enough. I needed to pay the illustrator, right? So she's literally a starving artist, right? So I needed to be able to pay her a commission. And so we had put together what we thought was an estimate of how much time that it would take. It turned out that she put in way, way, way more hours. But the vast majority of this was to pay her. And then the rest was to pay for printing of the first copies so that I wasn't going too far in debt to do this. So I had an incredible response. And so within 3 days, I had actually surpassed that amount. I had raised that amount on Kickstarter, and then a bunch of wonderful people, many of you in this room had just given me a check and said, I want to support this project. So that was fabulous. And because of how generous the donors were, I was able to set aside 500 copies to donate to libraries. So 400 copies are already in libraries in Iowa. So 300 of them went to school libraries, many thanks to my friend Don, who helped me connect with the AEA to get those delivered. And then the other 100 copies were sent to public libraries. I've got 100 copies sitting aside that I really want to get into Chicago public libraries, and it's been more of a challenge. So because it's self-published, there's procedures and protocols and stuff. So I haven't given up yet, but I'm still hoping to get them into public libraries in Chicago. But that's been an incredible thing. So again, at this point when we launched this, Edith was 108. So our biggest fear was that she would not be with us to see the final product. So Erica and I both were incredibly driven to move forward on this as quickly as we could. And so we had kind of set an aggressive timeline for that. And then, life happens, things happen. But we were able to get it done. So this is some of that rest of the story. So I did much of this work. She's in Seattle, so she's 2 hours earlier. She's also an artist, so she stays up later. So late into the evening, most nights we would be, everything was done online, and I'll show some examples of that. So we would be texting, communicating, doing Zoom calls later than I like to be up. And then when I have stuff going through my mind, I don't sleep. I know a lot of you can relate to that. So I'd be up early in the morning doing the other parts of it. So it was an exhausting year, but it was well worth it. I greatly benefited from the college alumni network again when I had been in touch with the alumni office and the president's office all along to let them know that I was doing this, ask them how much or how they might like to be involved. And one of the things that they offered was to put me in touch with Carolyn Arnold, who's another alumni who's written a vast number, many children's books. And so I was able to connect with her. Our first conversation, I have to share, is pretty funny because I told her how I was doing this and that I was working with the illustrator, and she said, oh, well, usually the author doesn't have that kind of input on the illustrations. Usually the publisher takes the text and then they figure out who's going to do the pictures and how they're going to be done. I'm like, well, that's not how we're doing this one. So she was a little dubious of our plan. I might have sounded like I had some crazy ideas of how this was going to work when she first talked to me, but it turned out my crazy is good crazy. So, but she was really helpful. I did bring along various things to show stages of the process. And so one of them is that early draft of the text, and then the editing input that Carolyn gave me. So she really helped to tighten the text up, to make it kind of more engaging and to add some different things. So I'm super grateful for her help. She was just a really big benefit to the project as a whole. Okay, so how do you do illustrations when you're in two different states and different time zones? So digital art. So Erica has been an artist for many years, and like many artists now, she has moved to doing everything digitally. So instead of a pad of paper, she has an electronic tablet. And so she will draw the different elements that are going to be a part of the page digitally, and then she can upload those into the pages and move them around and resize them and add different backgrounds and things. So this is a little bit of what our process looked like with with a sample page. So I would provide the text for the book. This is what the text on the page is going to say. And then I'd say, these are my ideas for the image. So this particular page is the page where Edith is hearing the family stories from her mother. And so I said, I want little Edith to be at her mother's side. Mom is working, doing some kind of chore, because we know she worked, doing all sorts of things. And then little vignettes to illustrate the stories that she's hearing from her mom. And then we had decided that picture from the cover, that this was the page we wanted that picture to show on. So these were the pieces that she had. So Erica would take that information, and then she would start sketching some things out. So this was her, it's actually pretty far along developed, but this is an example of one of the sketches that she did for one of the pieces of that page. So this is a little earlier thing where you can see the little rougher sketch from that one, and these vignettes of the other parts of the story that are on the page, and then that just as a reminder that image needs to be there somewhere. So she'd toss this out to me, and I'd say, all right, let's move this piece here, that piece there, divide it into 2 pages, and then we'd give it a look and talk through different things. We'd move things around a little bit more. We liked the symbolism of flowers. We played a lot with flowers because Edith's story is so full of hope and optimism. And we really saw the nature's imagery of that, spring and new growth and rising from the hardship. And so there's a lot of ideas that we tossed around that had flowers. This particular page, so I told you the background earlier of her grandparents' story. So the image of in the upper right there is symbolic of freedom seekers, right? Her grandfather seeking freedom, and then the image of, we knew that her grandmother had been, and the text says she was sent away from her mother when she was only 2 years old. Now, what we know from the story, as told by Edith, is that her grandmother watched her ride away from the back of a covered wagon. So this is more like kind of a kidnapping kind of feel to it, right? But she was sent away to safety. So we changed that picture so that it was this. But we kept the sorrowful mother. So pulled those pieces in, figured out how big was the font going to be, where different things were going to be positioned, played with background colors and ideas. The idea being that the stories were kind of on the wind, right? The stories in the air all around her, until we eventually developed and came to the place where it is as it was published. So that's what the process looked like. And we would work on a 2-page spread at a time. So take that and repeat it 22 times. Some pages were easier than others. And early on, it took us a while to find our pace, right? So July rolled around, and Miss Edith was turning 109. So, of course, I wanted to have something to show her that we were making progress. And so I put together a little special early edition of the book. So it had the edited text, right? So with the edits from Carolyn Arnold's input. And then it had a few of the sketches that, or the illustrations that we felt were done. And I've got a copy of it up here. If afterwards, I've put on the table here some of the things, if you want to see more what some of this stuff looked like. I've held on to it all, archivist. But you can kind of see the progress. So last summer, Dr. Tamara had a group of students doing research with her. So that's Team Renfrow going to visit Miss Edith for her 109th birthday. All of us brought little gifts for her, and mine was this booklet. She didn't have a lot of time to look at it while I was there, understandably. And so a few days later, I got a call from Alice. And Alice said, she doesn't like those pictures. And so now I love them both dearly, but they're both really strong women. I've got Erica on one side and I've got Alice on the other side, and I'm trying to figure out how do I convey this, right? Last thing we want to do is have a book that does not meet the hopes of Miss Edith and Alice for how her life is portrayed. So we knew we had to do something. So from that point on, we implemented that we would do a weekly call where Alice would connect with us, and we'd talk through the illustrations. This was going to slow things down a lot, right? And it's also complicated because an illustration by its nature is a representation of something that conveys a part of the story. It's not like a snapshot. Right? And I'm not sure how clearly that difference was understood, because many of the things it would, we wanted to get the hair right, we wanted to get the lips right, we wanted to get a lot of those things right. But sometimes we would be illustrating something to get a sense, to get a feeling for what the page was saying that may not be exactly how it was at that moment. I'm going to show you some examples. This was the original opening page that Erica had drawn. It has the house in the background. It has, again, flowers representing growth, and I think it's baby's breath. Erica knew what all the flowers were. And then the loving family with the newborn child. They were never that affectionate. Dad never would have held the baby. Dad never would have helped with the baby. That's not an accurate reflection of my family. So we took them out. This page, admittedly, is a little wild, okay? Now, I personally envision a house that has 6 children as being a little wild. It's not a big house, right? And I figured at some point, I knew that the 4 older children were mostly out working from the time that Edith, during Edith's formative years. But I figured at some point they were probably all home, and they were probably all helping with chores. Rudy played the trombone, and Edith hated it. She hates the trombone to this day because her brother would practice the trombone all the time, and she did not like it. And I thought it was just hilarious to have that in there. The house never would have been that chaotic. They never would have all been together, and there never would have been that kind of, this kind of represents too much chaos. Doesn't represent her childhood as she remembers it. So everybody went away except the 2 little ones. Edith's parents worked hard to support everybody, to do things. They went to church regularly, and this was our vision of them getting ready for church. Dad's helping out, we're doing hair. Well, the first thing was Rudy back there, that is way too much attitude. That never would have been allowed. That's a lot of sass, and that would not have been allowed. And Dad was always working. This is something that I heard over and over again. All of the pages where we had put pictures of Dad. Dad was always working. He was hustling to find whatever job he could wherever he was at. He wasn't home for Sunday dinner. He was a chef. He was preparing food for other people. He wasn't home for special occasions. He was a chef. He was preparing meals for other people. Dad was a loving father, but he was not a presence in the household. Take him out. And let alone, like, Mom always had glasses and the hair is too thick. They always had really thin hair, so lots of conversations about hair. And those clothes are too fancy. They were very poor. They're trying to get these details. There's stuff like that. Okay, this picture. So part of the story is how when Edith was very small, there were black men who attended Grinnell College through the Rosenwald Scholars. They were the few black students on campus at the time. Mrs. Renfrow would invite them all to their house on Sunday nights for dinner. And so this is a formative memory in Edith's mind. And so we wanted to illustrate that. She tells about how they loved the Jell-O that Mama made, Jell-O with, I don't know, walnuts in it? But these memories, so we needed to capture these dinners at home. So big family dinner at home. Well, remember, first thing is, they were never all there. Older siblings were always off working. They wouldn't have been that many people at the table. Now, look at the way these gentlemen are dressed. This young man has his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. That never would have happened. Over here, this sweater never would have happened. They always would have been in suit jacket, and they never would have relaxed and taken it off and rolled up their sleeves. So we want an accurate, right? We want to do our best to have the most accurate representation of how she remembers those things. So these pictures were changed. Sadly, I will say that when she looked at the final picture, so you'll see it, because I'll finish by reading the book so you can compare all these. But all of the chairs match at the dining room table. That wasn't the case. It was the middle of the Depression. They didn't have a matching dining room set. We missed that piece. Loving parents at that historic graduation. We know that we only have the picture of her graduation because her mother arranged for it to be taken. So I figured there's loving parents at her graduation, right? Well, first of all, Mama never wore hats, so that was one thing that we needed to take care of. And they never, ever, ever would have held hands in public. Never. Now, I don't know about a lot of you, some of you are the age of my mother. I was having a conversation with my mom, and she said, thinking back, my parents never would have held hands in public. Was just not something they did at that time, right? So, and Father would have been working. He wouldn't have been there. So we took them out. So these are the kinds of things that we strove to do, that we talked with Alice to do. And it took a lot of time. It took a lot more time to review every picture, to go all over all those things. A lot of the things, clothing, hairstyles, like even the hair in this, the hair's too thick. Constantly, that was one thing that, because Erica was basing things on the photographs that we have, right? And so she would put together these illustrations, and then we'd show them to Alice, and who would then take them, show them to Edith, and then get back to us. So it was a very long process. But it became really frustrating for Erica because she was basing it on pictures that she had, but well, that's when I was dressed up. That's not what I looked like every day, right? So my hair was always pulled back. It was always very thin. Our clothes, we didn't have fancy clothes, right? It was the middle, those kids' clothes looked too clean, right? So we had to find that balance because we also needed to have beautiful illustrations, right? So let's just say, I used all my best communication skills But I'm, for the most part, everyone is thrilled with the end product. So finding, doing the text editing, figuring out the illustrations, and then before the book can be published, I had to figure out what's going to go in those endnotes. How many pages are going to be in the book? When you have a book printed, the number of pages have to be divisible by a certain number because of the way the printing press so how does that work? What size do we want it? Do we want it landscape? Do we want it portrait? How big, right? Is it going to be soft cover, hardcover? All of those things had to be decided. So those were my early morning that was my early morning work when we were working on illustrations in the evening. I used a company out of Chicago called Print Ninja. And so they sent me a bunch of samples of other books so the paperweight, is it matte or glossy, all that kind of stuff. And so once all of those decisions were made, then I had to get a quote. And for that quote, then I needed to figure out, well, how many do I want to order? Because if I order more, the price per book is less. But I'm also ordering more that might be stuck in my basement, right? So all of those kind of decisions were things that I needed to decide. Now, what I knew was that I had lots of donations, right? So everybody who donated to the project early on was going to get a free copy of the book. And I had lots of donations to give copies to libraries. So that was about 650 books right there that I needed. The college had pre-ordered 500 copies. So I'm like, all right, I got 1,100 taken care of. How many more do I want? Where do I balance that? So I ordered 2,000 copies, and I still have about 500 in my basement. So they'll be around for a little while, but we still got to get some into Chicago. So I'm still trying to get them into that market. The Renfrows, or the Smiths, are really anxious to get them into Chicago. So we've contacted, I've got an alumni friend in Chicago who's contacted some of the independent bookstores. But again, because it's self-published and because I don't have it available through the warehouse people that bookstores usually use, it's that much harder. So these are things that I've learned, right? And so figuring out maybe ways that I can adjust that as the year comes. But those are all things that have been a part of the learning process. So right around Halloween time, I had printed out some proofs. I think I've got copies of proofs over here. Going through and making sure, margins are right. When you sometimes things look one way on the screen, and then when you print it out, it looks different. All right, so you might get some bleed lines, you might get some other things. So I was very lucky that I had the pretty nice printers here at the library. So I paid to have 11 by 17 high quality prints done so that I could fine tune all of that stuff and catch those things. So another side note that happened. So in the last stretch, I had a vacation with my mom and sister planned to go to Ireland for 2 years. And so that's what's happening right at the beginning of October. So the plan was that we knew this going in. The plan was that Erica had a certain number of things that she was going to be able to clean up and do while I was gone. On the last call we had before I left on my trip, just as we connected, she said, "Oh man, I just took a nasty fall on the steps. I think I'll be all right, but it really hurts." We talked about 5 minutes, and I could tell she wasn't doing good. She finally said, "I just can't. I got to go get this checked. It's really bad." So we disconnected, and I headed to Ireland. Had a lovely 10 days. Thought maybe she was working through the list that we had emailed and we had talked about. I got back, and she hadn't done anything. And I got in touch with her, and she said, "I have been in so much pain. I just haven't been able to really work on anything." Well, we were up against our self-imposed deadline of the end of October to finish things up. Now, one great blessing with digital publishing, so she was doing her drawings. and putting the pages together, and then she was uploading them into a tool called Canva. Canva is a cloud-based kind of publishing tool that I use here at the library quite a bit. So she was able to share kind of the master file share access to the master file with me. So I was able to go in and do some, moving this here and tweaking this here. And then the last 4 pages or so, we took some shortcuts so that instead of doing illustrations, we were using photographs and having just kind of some adjustments to the photographs. And the reason is that she had broken her ankle in 3 places and had to have surgery and pins put in it. She had pushed through and done the last 2 weeks of work on this with a broken foot. And after it was sent to the publisher, she ended up having surgery and being in rehab for 2 months. So, because the house she lives in, she's in the 3rd floor. So, anyway, so it just amazes me that she was able to do what she could. But the fact that we were able to still get it to the publisher on when we did is a testament to her perseverance and stubbornness. So anyways, we got it off to the printer on October 31st. So the thing with Print Ninja is they are a Chicago-based company, but because of the way printing works and how expensive it is, it's actually less expensive for them to print it in China and ship it here. China's a long ways away. So the vast majority of the shipment was sent by cargo, by freight, ship. And that takes a long time. Now, Edith was 109, so I didn't want her to wait. So we had a couple boxes airmailed. So we had a couple boxes sent by airmail, paid the extra for those. And then the weekend of Thanksgiving, while I was away with family, expecting these would come on Monday, they showed up at the house on Saturday. So we might have driven a little extra fast on our way home because I knew they were waiting. So being able to open it up and kind of just feel it, right? To just feel it and open it for the first time was wonderful. And then we planned that the next weekend, we would make that very special trip to Chicago and take it to her and show it to her for the first time. Now, I've told you that the illustrations were a challenge. Edith is thrilled with the book. But her first reaction when she opened it up, if you know, the first page, you open it up and it's that picture of her mom at the laundry tub. And she said, well, that's not what my mom's laundry tub looks like. We missed that one, so. But she did sit and look and go through each page and is very proudly passing it around to all of her friends, despite the few mistakes that are still not completely accurate and photographic in the illustrations. So to be able to see her holding it is just joy beyond words. So do you want to hear it? I think that's what's next. Oh, wait, no, I want to tell you a little bit, because many of you may know about the fun that we had. Remember those 2 weeks of really bad winter that we had this year? That's when the books were scheduled to arrive. I had been following it. They're out of the port. They've been released from customs. They're on their way. They arrived in the warehouse in Des Moines the Saturday before the first big storm. And they were going to be coming from Des Moines to Grinnell on a semi-truck with a lift, right? Because we don't have a forklift, so it was going to be one of those that has the tailgate that goes up and down. So they were in Des Moines, and they were supposed to get to Grinnell on the Wednesday after the first 10 inches of snow. So that got delayed. And so then they were going to come the next Monday. Well, that's when the temperatures dropped to about 25 below zero. And guess what hydraulic lifts don't do when it's that cold? So they called and they said, yeah, we can't bring them to you because the lift won't work on the truck. So I had taken that day off. It happened to be Martin Luther King Day. And I had been waiting for these books an awful long time. So my husband and I bundled up And we drove to Des Moines, and we had the total weight of the shipment was in the information, and so we had made sure that it wasn't more than 5 more people in our vehicle. So we were pretty sure the weight would be fine, and we hoped that they would all squeeze in, but we weren't sure. So we actually took off with 2 cars. So he took off with his Ford Explorer. I took off with my little Mazda sedan, just in case they weren't all going to fit. And we got to the interstate, and my car got up to 50 miles an hour, and it started to shake. Now, granted, it had been sitting outside because the garage at our house is full of my husband's R&D work, so we don't actually get to park the cars in it. So it had been sitting outside in that frigid cold, but I wasn't sure what was going on. Is it something serious? Is it something to do with the weather? Because it was about 10 below at this point. And so we pulled over in Newton, and he drove it a little bit, and he's like, yeah, let's just park it here, and we'll see if everything will fit in the other car. So off we went. We were able to squeeze them all in. The car, it turns out, when it gets that cold, you can have like fluid, like water will freeze inside the wheel well. So it was just like the wheels were all off balance. So it was fine as soon as it warmed up, but just more of the adventure. So the next day, finally then, because of course the bookstore was closed for Martin Luther King Day, so the next day, finally, I was able to take them to the bookstore and get those first deliveries there, and that's how it went. So now, are you ready to hear the story? All right, one more drink of water. No one is better than you. Edith Renfrow Smith and the power of a mother's words. There's a list of all the lovely people who supported the campaign. Thank you to those of you out here who are on that list. It wouldn't have happened without you. Edith Renfrow Smith was tenacious and resolute. From the time she was little until she was old and gray, she faced each day with determination, ready to greet each person with a smile and each challenge with the strength passed on from her family. Edith was born in a little house with a big yard in Grinnell, Iowa in 1914. Grinnell, a small town surrounded by farm fields and home to a college of the same name, was a place that would always mean home to Edith. Edith had 3 older sisters, Helen, Alice, and Evanelle, and 1 older brother, Rudy. She was 6 years younger than any of them. They were often away working when she was little. But when she was 2, her little brother Paul was born. They were very close and did everything together, almost as if they were twins. Being a black family in a mostly white town made things difficult for the Renfrows. Edith's father, Lee, was a chef. He cooked at the town hotel and for special parties, and sometimes took the train to other towns to find work. He would take any job he could find. At home, he had a giant garden where he grew corn, beans, carrots, parsnips, every kind of vegetable in the seed catalog. Edith and Paul helped by pulling weeds and picking vegetables. They especially loved to catch the garter snakes that slithered among the plants. In the kitchen, Edith's mother, Eva Pearl, filled canning jars with tomatoes and peas and packed the root cellar with potatoes and carrots to preserve them for the winter. Mama earned money by doing laundry for other people. She boiled the clothes in a big pot over a fire in the backyard, scrubbing them by hand on a washboard to get them clean. As often as she could, Mama would help with church and community events. She worked hard and made friends everywhere she went. Edith's parents did all they could to support their family. They made sure their children knew that they were loved and that they could accomplish important things with their lives. And every one of them would do just that. Mama always told them, no one is better than you. They may have more money, they may be more beautiful, but no one is any better than you. Little Edith loved to hear Mama share about their family and all they had overcome. "Mama, tell me a story," begged Edith. Edith learned how her grandfather, George Craig, had escaped slavery in Missouri, traveling with others to freedom through Iowa, and how her grandmother, Eliza, had been born to an enslaved woman and was sent away from her mother when she was only 2 years old. She grew up free, but never saw her mother again. Edith never forgot these stories. When Edith was a young girl, black men who were Grinnell College students often came to the Renfrow house for Sunday dinner. They were called Rosenwald scholars. They sat around the table and told stories about their homes, places very different from Grinnell, like Chicago and Jamaica and Liberia. After enjoying Mama's home-cooked meal, everyone gathered around and sang, while Edith's sisters played the piano. The men were smart and fun, and Edith loved being around them. Edith also met college students at the youth club near her house, the Uncle Sam's Club. The college students taught them games and ran and jumped around with them. They were just like great big kids, but they also knew about science and new discoveries and inventions. They were so interesting. They made Edith curious about the world and want to explore new ideas. She wanted to go to Grinnell College to be like them. Edith also loved being a part of Campfire Girls. Her group leader, Letitia Connard, did things that most women did not do at the time, like teaching at the college and driving a car. Once she took the girls on a camping trip several miles from town. Edith hadn't been on many car rides, and she had never been camping. She learned about nature and survival skills and the stars. It was all very exciting. Mrs. Connard told the girls they could do anything boys could do, and she wanted children from poor families like Edith's to know that they were just as important as anyone else. Edith liked Mrs. Connard. The things she said were just like what Mama always told her, that no one is any better than someone else because of how they look or where they live. In high school, Edith did well in her classes and enjoyed all the activities, especially sports. She played basketball, volleyball, field hockey. She was always the only black person on any of the teams. Most people were nice to her, but there were some who were not. In town, the candy store where the kids liked to go wouldn't let her in because she was black. And the movie theater would only let her sit in the worst seats in the balcony. When people were mean like that, Edith remembered what Mama told her, no one is any better than you. So she didn't let what people thought bother her, at least not very much. After high school, Edith was determined to go to Grinnell College, but she needed money to pay for it. Even if she lived at home, she still had to pay tuition, $275 a year. That was a lot of money in the middle of the Great Depression in 1932. So Edith took classes to learn to type fast and take dictation. But even though she could type faster than anyone else in her class, no business in town would hire her. So Edith looked for work at the college, and by the next fall she had 2 jobs, one in the office of a professor and the other working in the copy center. She was ready to become a Grinnell College student. Edith walked the mile to campus every day to go to classes, work, and spend time with the other students. She made friends and loved being a part of activities like dances and sports. She was even on the champion ring tennis team one year. She met interesting people who came to teach and give talks, like Amelia Earhart, the first woman to fly a plane by herself across the Atlantic Ocean. After Earhart spoke to a big crowd in Herrick Chapel, she went to a gathering where she met with just the women students. Amelia Earhart just wanted to talk and laugh and have fun like the rest of them. During the 4 years Edith attended Grinnell, she was the only black student on campus. There had been black men at Grinnell before, like the Rosenwald scholars, who had visited her house when she was little, but there were never very many. 2 black women had gone to Grinnell before, but neither of them had graduated. So when Edith received her diploma in June 1937, she made history as the first black woman to graduate from Grinnell College. It was a very happy day for Edith and her family. Mama asked a photographer to take Edith's picture so they would always remember that special day. After graduation, Edith moved to Chicago and got a job. A few years later, she met a nice man named Henry Smith. They got married in Grinnell in the living room of her parents' house, surrounded by all the people and things that she loved. As much as Edith liked Grinnell, she and Henry decided it would be better to raise their family in Chicago. Henry worked as a milkman, and Edith was a secretary. They bought a house where they raised their 2 daughters, Virginia and Alice Frances. In 1954, Edith decided to try something new. She took classes to become a 6th grade teacher. She loved working with children. She told her students, "No one is better than you. They may have more money, they may be more beautiful, but no one is any better than you." Many children had never heard anything like that before. Edith gave them confidence and made them believe in themselves. After 22 years of teaching, Edith retired, but she still wanted to help people, so she volunteered at Goodwill, the Chicago Art Institute, her church, anywhere she was needed. And she loved to drive. She volunteered to drive her friends around until she was well into her 90s. She was an active volunteer for more than 40 years. In 2009, when she was 95, she was inducted into the Chicago Senior Citizens Hall of Fame. Even though she lived in Chicago, Edith always thought of Grinnell as home. She and Henry visited it as often as they could. Edith owned the house where she grew up until 2004 and rented it to other people, making sure it was a nice place to live. When Edith and Henry visited Grinnell, they stayed with Alma and Booker Kiner, good friends who lived on a farm south of town. Edith and Alma cooked and baked treats, made soap, and talked and laughed together. Henry loved to help Booker do chores and work in the fields. When Edith and Henry went back to Chicago, Alma and Booker gave them fresh cream, eggs, and other good things from the farm. Edith never missed a Grinnell College reunion and the chance to visit with the friends she made when she was a student. At her 70th reunion in 2007, she was 93 years old. There weren't many people from her class left, but other alumni knew how important she was. So that year, a student art gallery, the Smith Gallery, was named in her honor. In 2019, when Edith was 104, Grinnell College awarded her an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters. It recognized her place in the history of the college and her life of giving to others. It was May, but was a very cold day, so Edith wore a stocking cap to try to stay warm. The celebration of her life and accomplishments made her very proud and happy. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Edith went to the microphone and said, "Grinnell has been my life." The more people heard about Edith, the more they wanted to know about her. Even though she was very old, she still had an incredibly sharp mind and quick wit. In 2021, when she was 107, she came back to Grinnell for a special celebration and exhibit about her life in the Smith Gallery. She visited with students from the high school and from the college and shared her stories. She was the oldest person any of them had ever met. Edith is always full of joy and positivity and a big smile. She tells people what her mother told her. No one is better than you. They may have more money, they may be more beautiful, but no one is any better than you. Talking with Edith makes people happy. They want to be more like her. In 2022, when Edith was 108, Grinnell College announced they were going to name a building after her. Renfrow Hall will be different from other college dorms, with both apartments for students and spaces for community events. Located between the campus and downtown, it will be a space to bring college people and community people together. Edith Renfrow Smith is the oldest living graduate of both Grinnell High School and Grinnell College. She was born and raised in Grinnell. She is a part of the town history as well as the college history. She represents all that is good about both, and both will be celebrated in Renfrow Hall. Renfrow Hall will open in 2024, 110 years after Edith was born, in a little house with a big yard on First Avenue. When Edith learned about Renfrow Hall, she remembered all the things that she had lived through and all her memories of Grinnell. She thought about her mother and father and sisters and brothers. She knew they would be happy and proud that there would be a building in Grinnell with their family name on it. She hoped that her story would help everyone know that what her mama had said was true, that it doesn't matter what you look like or how much money you have. It doesn't matter what other people think, because no one is any better than you. If you focus on the good in others and in the world, and if you are diligent and determined, you can overcome any obstacle. You can make a difference and make the world a better place. You can be like Edith. The end. Now there is significant notes at the end of the book if you've seen it, so there's information about her story. There's also some photos. I especially want to point out the little photo on the bottom right. That's Edith sitting in a little red car. She bought that for herself when she turned 100. So when you make it, a little red car, she always has said she loved to drive, and she loved to drive fast. She didn't understand why it took us so long to get to Chicago. It never took her that long. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed today, and there are books at the bookstore if you're interested in getting your own copy, and I'm happy to sign anything if you're interested in that. So I think I went a little over, sorry.
That's okay. I'm sure if you have questions, Monique will be glad to answer questions after we're done. So thank you so much, Monique, for sharing the process required to write, illustrate, and publish this book that was a labor of love, celebrating a remarkable woman, Edith Renfrow Smith. We look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday, April 17th, when Maria Tapias, Professor of Cultural and Medical Anthropology at Grinnell College, will present graphic storytelling, medical comics, and the patient experience. And that will be our last bucket course for the season. So next week will be the last one. We hope to see you all there.